Hello everyone, in this video we're going to look at how to code a URL shortener using FastAPI and Python code, a bit like Bitly. So if you don't know what Bitly is, it shortens a long URL into a custom one. So a URL shortener built with powerful tools to help you grow and protect your brand. So one of the things they're selling here is that you can use your own domain name followed by the short link, and it makes it much more compact to fit into I don't know, wherever you want to put it, onto Twitter or onto your company marketing material or wherever. So it's at bit.ly.com. There are various different copycat versions as well. Yeah, enough said. I guess most people probably already know what Bitly is. So I'm halfway through writing it, so whilst it's fresh in my mind, I want to show you what I've done so far. As you can see, that's actually an animated GIF of a recording of me actually running it, but let's start from the beginning. So if you've got a long URL, let's say we've got a very long URL that we want to shorten. So I don't know, say it's even the URL to my GitHub repo. That's quite a long URL and you might want to shorten that. So first thing is, the specification for this project is actually, without giving too much away, one of the requirements is to shorten this down to something that looks a bit more like, let's say this for instance, then it'd be / and then some random characters. So we'd probably end up with something like that. So that's what we start with, and that's what we want to get to. So all of this, let's make, we've got some color here. Wow, this is the first time I've been using this, so I quite like the freestyle way of doing little. So that's one, that's the first part of the project. You'll take that once you've already converted it, so to speak. So and then redirect or find it, basically find it on the, and the randomness will generate those 5 characters. We'll also have to use URL lib pass, and that's not pasting it in, so let me just do that. So it's basically going to look it up in a database, or another part of the spec was to keep it simple, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So rather than create a database where you would have a tiny link and then the original link, I'm just going to do it with JSON, and that actually makes life quite a lot easier because you don't have to go into, you don't have to do SQLite obviously comes with the default installation of Python, but if this is from multiple operating systems, then I'm not really going to be getting into testing it for Apple and Windows and so on. So here we go. This is the spec. Part 1 is convert it to a short URL, and part 2 is to take the short URL and convert it back to its original so you can actually go and look it up. If I actually had a domain, that needs to be a .com, doesn't it? Or a imagine if it was a .com. Anyway, so what we're going to be doing is, first off, we're going to shorten the URL. So how are we going to do that? We need to split the long URL, and then what we want to do is we want to preserve or extract the domain. For instance, if I did have a website called python360.com, I would then want my new URL to be python360.com /a123.b or something like that. So what we'll be doing with that is using, and it just so happens that Python's got a very handy library to do that for us. So if you've not come across them before, it's called you've got the scheme, the path, the netloc. So yeah, the scheme here, for instance, is, just zoom in. So the scheme here is HTTP, but probably going to be more interested in HTTPS. The netloc the host name and the port. So yeah, netloc, path, scheme. This is Python 3.10, but it's been around for a while. So if you're already familiar with that, let's move on. So we're going to extract the domain, and then what we're going to do is we're going to append a certain number of random alpha numeric to the domain. So we're going to end up just with, that's effectively our short URL. Once we've got that, we will then need to store the domain plus, when I say certain number, well, I think probably 5, 6. 6 would actually give us 999,999. So effectively it gives you, yeah, a million virtually. Plus, let's say 5 cars. And then once we've stored that, we need to store that with along with original URL. So once we've stored the original URL with the shortened one, that will then allow us to come back and type in the short one, and it will do a lookup within the JSON file, and it will find the long URL, and then we can go and visit it. So that's basically the 4 things we need to do just to get some kind of program up and running. So just to go back, you can see it's actually, if I zoom in on that, it's a bit fuzzy because of the quality of the GIF, but what I was doing there was putting in google.com motorbikes, and it shortens it to, I've been using Gunicorn, which is kind of the recommended mini web server for FastAPI. So another part of the requirement of this project is to use FastAPI. I've done a couple of videos using FastAPI before. I've gone off and done other stuff recently, so I will just need to get back up to speed with FastAPI. The other thing which is a requirement is tests. And okay, so while I'm on a roll, I thought I'd actually just record this while it's all fresh in my mind. And yeah, so this is the structure. It's fairly common to create a folder called app and a folder called tests. All this is being done within a virtual environment. I've actually created a fresh virtual environment because I actually want to have, ideally, I only want to have the freshly installed modules. Unfortunately, I've added one or two too many. One that I added and I didn't use in the end was hash IDs. FastAPI 0.79, Gunicorn 20.1, pytest, requests, Starlet, I think FastAPI installed that, URL lib3, Uvicorn, Logger I probably don't need, Pedantic. There seems to be a conflict with Pedantic and Python 3.10.4 that I'm using, so I know that I was getting issues. Can't remember what the error was, but if you Google for it, Pedantic and FastAPI and Python 3.10.4 can have problems. So I've chosen not to use Pedantic for kind of typing. Okay, so all the usuals. Remember, if you're ever using pytest, you have to create dunder init dunder.py. So without further ado, I just want to show off and show that I've passed some tests. And also I do want to just show the, I think I have to run pytest first. Let's run pytest. Okay, so I thought I might as well record this just in case I actually managed to fix it. So yeah, was it Control-Shift-P, pytest, Python configure tests? There we go, it's come back. So despite that error message, I've now got that icon back, which was missing just now. It could take a while. I just want to show, there we go, it's come back up. Don't ask me what's going on there, but yeah, just to see, we've got some tests which all live in the tests folder. So let's just go to the tests. So the tests, I've got one test that's testing my function which generates a short URL. I've got another one which tests the function which passes the base URL, and they both work. And all I can really test here is assert the length of them. So generate a short URL. So the length of the short URL is 3. Assert short equals 3. So if I put in 5 there should still work. And let's just go to testing again. Test gen short. Just run that test by itself. Yeah. I think when I first started doing this, I must have put in 3. I wasn't going to make a 3-character long tiny URL. That's too small. So yeah, enough looking at the tests. Let's look at the code. So what we've got is app folder. Inside the app folder, the JSON file, which is containing the original URL and the short URL in a dictionary. There's a load that I've already tested. Ignore the ones where there's a short URL on the right hand side. That's me trying to break it. We've got main, gen short, and fetch. So I might have to rename these, but fetch is what actually is the user. It's not the user interface. Well, it is the user interface. It's just user command line interface. Gen short is basically contains all of my functions, and main is the FastAPI part. So if you're here primarily for the FastAPI bits and pieces, then this is what you will be most interested in. These are my functions. I'm importing these from gen.short, which is beneath the app, inside the app directory. App here, app is actually a variable which equals FastAPI. It creates an instance of the FastAPI class. And what we've got here is my first endpoint, which is test. So I just wrote that just to actually check the API was working. If I'll get to Swagger in a second. So I've created 3 endpoints: test endpoint, an endpoint which creates the short version, and an endpoint which creates which creates the short URL, and an endpoint which visits the short URL. Although it's not really visiting the short one, it's doing a lookup. It's looking up the short URL and translating it back to a long URL. And then we return the long URL back to what is effectively our user interface, command line user interface. And then when I run that actually, right at the end, it goes off and does a lookup based on what it got back from the API. So here I'm passing the short URL, the one that I've already shrunk down. I'm passing that to the API, and then the API is looking it up and saying, if you've given me the short URL, you need to be going off and looking up for this long URL, which was the original URL. And then hopefully, the other thing I need to do is just decode the response, because otherwise you get a B and an apostrophe before it. Okay, so important tip. If you run into problems with Junicorn, kill the process. So pkill Junicorn, and I put notes in here actually. So kill the process, then start it up again. Now, for all this code, you'll run into problems if you call the Python files from the wrong starting location, which is what I did, so don't do that. As you can see, I've just had it working here because I am now calling the test, the fetch response.py. I'm calling that from my app folder. And also, if you're using VS Code, what you can do is you can actually duplicate. If you click on the plus sign, you can just duplicate your current window. That's really useful because if you're in a virtual environment, if you open a new shell, you'll have to go into your virtual environment, go into the bin and do source activate. You don't want to keep on doing that. if you click on the plus sign, I'll do it here. You see, I've still got this here, virtual environment. So I've actually duplicated the current shell, which is really useful. So this one, I'm running, here we go. So I'm running Junicorn here within VS Code. So you don't have to exit and fire it up in terminal or anything. It's all, if you use the integrated terminal in VS Code, it makes life a lot easier. So that means that UVcorn Junicorn is working. Let's just clear this now. And what I'm, that's just for notes, we'll close that. So I've also had an issue with paths for pytest. Let me just run pytest again. No, that's where I was running into problems, because I was having to go to the folder above to get pytest working. That's where you can get into a muddle, because pytest you need to run above the app directory. And I've got issues here now. So if I go up one directory, cd ... and then I run pytest now, file not found error. When you run pytest from here, it's not finding the map urls.json file. So pytest is failing, but the code is working. So just a little note of caution there. You can run into a right muddle because your pytest fails, but your code actually works. So working code, and then I have to go back and fix the pytest, which seems a bit backward, but right. So I've got fetch. I'll just show you the fetch file again. So the fetch file, what it's actually doing is it's basically asking the user for a URL. You put in the long URL, it runs a regex regular expression on it, really long one, which I found, did a little bit of searching, and none of them are bulletproof because they'll all miss kind of edge cases, but this is one of the better ones. Yeah, it goes right off the edge. Sorry about that. I may or may not come back and split that up to 80 characters. That's harder work than it sounds. URL equals find all regex. So if it finds a match, then it proceeds and it sets the while loop to true, and then you carry on. If it doesn't find a match, then it stays as false. So valid is false, and it keeps on prompting the user to enter a valid URL. I can show you that here. So Python fetch response. Now I'll just show you what happens if I type in gobbledygook, the regular expression, the while loop continues, because valid stays false. So let's get the valid URL, just a random one from Stack Overflow. Okay, so shorten that, and we can actually go in and check live, and we will see that that should be the, there we go, RW397, and what it's done is it's written the short URL, and it's remembered, it's kept a note of the long URL, because then when we enter the short URL, in fact, just to prove that this is finding old links, there's an old one, Python docs. So if we go in and enter that, it's going to do a request to the API with the old short URL, and the API will then run the function in gen_short, and it's retrieved the long URL. And then you can obviously follow the link and off you go to visit the Python URL lib. Why is that so difficult to say? URL lib.pass. Pass URLs into components. So here we go, working code. We've got we've got working code, except our pytests are getting in a bit of a muddle with the paths. So let's just run that again. I did use it to develop the code, honestly. It's just having fixed the relative paths to make the code work, the pytest no longer works. Right. Let's do a bit more demonstration. So let's get another link. Let's just go off and get a long link. So we'll go and get, what's this program in Arduino? That looks like quite a nice long link. Paste, so Python fetch underscore resp.py, enter a URL to shorten, press enter. Shortened URL. So this 127. That's obviously the local host. If we had this on a web server in a data center with our own domain name, obviously we would then be doing http.zitly vgdmu, and vgdmu with this short URL would then take us back to the Arduino one.